Begin with the end in mind is amazing and timeless advice, and it applies to just about anything you can think of, including getting a business loan. If you don't think it all the way through, you'll end up with a loan that doesn't fit what you need, even though there's a good chance you're still going to get the loan. That is not a good place to be. My guest today helps medical and dental practices with loans in their businesses and has some solid advice for us about this. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Usually that's what they want. And care is better when the provider owns the practice, because that's when they're going to have the most freedom to make the clinical decisions they think are necessary. It's just different when somebody else owns the practice. Eventually, their agenda usually can start to creep in a little bit. And now the provider's got more to think of. Maybe some choices are limited. Who knows what else? Let's just keep it all easier and keep it all private to begin with. My guest today is Nick Spanakis. Nick is Executive Vice President and Group Manager for PNC's Specialty Business Banking Groups. In this role, he is responsible for driving the strategy and client relationship management activities for PNC's healthcare business banking and industry segmentation groups. He joined PNC in 1998. Previously, Nick held various leadership positions in wealth planning and investments, business and consumer lending operations management, financial product development, corporate marketing, customer segment management, commercial banking, and centralized client services management. Nick graduated with a bachelor's degree from John Carroll University, and he earned his master's degree from Baldwin Wallace University. Nick, thank you for coming on Practice Care.
I'm excited to be here, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. It's not one that I had thought about before we talked about it before coming on today. And so I've become quite curious about it. And hopefully I want to learn something too. Before we get into that, I want to start with you, where I start with every guest. Fill in some more of your background for us. We know your bio was short. That's what I asked for. We know that you've been in the banking world for a while. How'd you get into it? Why healthcare? Help us out.
Yeah, a great question, Carl. Thanks. And so I'm based in Ohio. My family, I come from a family of immigrants. Both my parents came from overseas, from Greece. And so when my parents came to the States, one of the things my father did, like many Greek families do, is because he became an entrepreneur. So I grew up in a business, small business environment, and worked with my dad for many years since I was a young person. And throughout the years, as other small business owners looked to my father for business advice, business counsel, we all realized how important capital was to the business, and also how to run a solid business operation. My father encouraged me to pursue my educational degree, and which I did, and I looked up to all of the advisors that he would bring to the table as they would talk about how to prosper as small business owners, and decided that one of the most impactful areas is the person who handles cash flow as well as capital to have a business operate, because you can't succeed as a practice owner without having ample cash flow. And likewise, capital is necessary as well. So I chose banking and got into banking, and have been, as you noted, for 37 years, have seen a lot of growth in that space. One of the organizations I worked for early on was looking to grow and expand their services. And I had a background in trading healthcare companies, publicly traded healthcare companies. So I knew how to read financials. I knew a lot about the supply chain of healthcare. And so that organization, I suggested to them as part of their growth strategy that they might want to focus on the space of private healthcare practices. They took me up on that suggestion, asked me if I can get that business started, which is what I did. And I've been attached to it ever since. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity, not only for me, but also for my organization and for all the small business independent practices that are out there in the marketplace that we service today.
That's great. Yeah. And so, and there it is, that fills it in. So healthcare, almost not by chance, but, it wasn't sort of a lifelong, we've had some guests on, why are you in healthcare? My parents were doctors. My cousins were, everybody's sounds different for you.
Yeah, a little bit different for me. I just had an affinity to healthcare, largely, with the one of the organizations I work for, they were managing a portfolio of investments, and that portfolio happened to be healthcare oriented. I was one of the people on that team, and I really got into healthcare. I saw how dynamic it was, and it fascinated me. Being a small business owner, a very curious mind, and I saw different ways to improve processes, procedures, how do you attract patients, how important communications were, the criticality of different staff members, etc. It was multidimensional, fast moving, and ever changing. And still to this day, with the digitization of healthcare, fast moving isn't the word for it. However, I see it as a great equalizer where independent practices have a heck of a lot more opportunity today to compete, to be vibrant, and to provide quality care. And I just love the fact that I had that background that I did,
Yeah.
to see it on a large scale as well as on in the environment that I work with today.
Right. Right. Cool. Well, thank you for that. And I opened up the episode by talking about, begin with the end in mind, think beyond the immediate. And so the question is, you know, why is it important for practice owners to think beyond the immediate loan? I want to sort of add to that and say, when you say think beyond the immediate loan, what do you mean? And then, maybe how far down, don't get specific. It's too granular, but, and then why? Why is it important to think that way?
Yeah, Carl, I several things come to mind with that question. When you look at many business owners, especially in the healthcare space, excellent scientists, excellent healthcare clinicians, but on the business side of healthcare, many times think of it like a home mortgage, or many times think of it like buying a piece of commercial real estate. And so what we've seen over a course of time is that um, folks fail to realize that once that loan's in place, once you're in business, if you haven't thought through your business plan and haven't prepared properly, then what you end up with is a large monthly payment, no patients, or a few patients and a ton of staff. So what ends up having to happen is that the doctors that we work with, we often say, hey, look, you need to have a business plan. You need to think about yourself as well first, right? Do you want to be the clinician in the practice? Do you want to be the business manager in the practice? Do you want to play the role of a practice administrator? Because depending upon what the doctor wants to do in their practice will then dictate what type of employees they need to hire. What type of patient experience do they want to provide? What type of equipment? Do they have the certifications necessary,
Yeah.
to perform the procedures they want, so on and so forth. So thinking about a loan is where most people start, because they say, hey, look, I need capital in order to get into business for myself. But what they fail to realize is that the loan is one of the last things, one of the first things they had to put forth is, what's their plan? What are they hoping to accomplish? What are they aspiring to achieve? And then they look at the loan second, which is, so how do I make that become a reality?
Yeah.
Where does that liquidity come from in order for me to perform, the type of services that I want to the patient base that I'm most interested in?
So I'll bet
So
so as you're asking these questions of, prospective doctor client X, what type of practice do you want? What role do you see yourself playing? What is the somewhat specific vision of the future? Do you get a lot of, I don't know. I don't know. I just want to treat pay, like, and what do you, because I face the same thing for the business I run, we do marketing agency. How much do you need to grow? I don't know. I just need more patients. Kind of matters, man, because it's, it guides what we do and how much of it we do. So what do you do how often do you get like, I don't know. And how do you help them turn that into something more tangible?
what a great question. Most of the time, many of my doctors, they don't know, or
Yeah.
yeah, and or they have a plan, but the plan is marketing oriented. It's not about the fine details. So or they'll end up saying, hey, look, it's a great set of questions, but the advisors that I've turned to so far, one of my family members, or the person who works for a chocolates manufacturing company, or my spouse's relative, never told me I didn't need to know all of that. I just need to know how much money I can get. So the advice that they're getting from the pool of people they normatively turn to for advice or opinions, influence what they bring to the table and how thoughtful they've been. And many times that thought, the level of thought is centered around, hey, look, I need so much money for this particular location, for this type of equipment, and the patients will come. Or I don't have to worry about establishing let's say, even a basic checking account until I open my practice. But yet they're writing checks from their personal account to handle architectural fees or other type of advisor fees, which technically should be coming out of a business operating account,
Yeah.
not necessarily their personal account. So even something simple like that, or payroll services, they haven't thought about payroll services. So you'd be surprised how, I would say, underprepared many of them are, but they've gotten more sophisticated over the years. And by doing more reading because of technology, listening to more podcasts,
Yeah.
paying attention to talking with their peers, that level of additive sophistication has allowed them to fill in some of the blanks that in the past they haven't normatively covered. But still today, many of them come
They
underprepared.
they do. And what you're talking about as a business plan, right? As you're talking, I used to be more surprised. I'm not surprised anymore. I mean, I've had interacted with enough, doctors who own, had enough guests on the podcast, et cetera. And really what I get is just a bit more agitated at the lack of any kind of education as part of medical school, dental school, fill in the specialty school. And maybe the answer is, what, they all ought to have just a business planning class. Maybe that's what it ought to be, because people like me and you rail on how there's nothing there, but they don't have time for a full curriculum. Maybe that's, I don't know, but it's just, it gets down to who are your advisors in that case, and whatever they happen to tell you. And it's just not even like an instinct, but like, do you coach clients about business planning? You really need to do this. You should do this before a loan. You should in conjunction with, I mean, do you guys do this?
Yes, we do. Yeah, that's part of our process, So, within our organization at PNC Bank, we absolutely we care about the long-term efficacy of one of our healthcare practices. So, my team, what they do is they'll meet with a doctor up front, Carl, and then that same individual will carry a relationship with that doctor through their lifetime,
Mhm.
that they choose to be in practice. And that's a very different model for us, because with us, we care about the fact that that doctor, after once they start their business, that they're still serving their community, still employing the people from that local community, still buying goods and services in that local community, over a long period of time, so they can protect their reputation in the marketplace. And so it matters, who you bring to the table, and it matters if it's important to you as a doctor. And that's in some cases, some individuals feel like, hey, look, that your banks sell loans. Well, some banks do, but
Mhm.
not all banks. And it's probably really important that people distinguish the difference, because you certainly don't want to hang your shingle and be in bed with somebody who's just willing to sell you a loan without caring whether or not you'll be in business 5, 7, 10, 15 years from now.
And
I
so
think
when
that's
you say selling a loan, is that what you mean? They'll give you the loan and then it's sort of see you later and maybe we'll
right.
talk again,
Yeah,
versus hang on, we want to sit on the same side of the table with you and
right.
make sure this thing works.
You're right. And that's the advice, the counsel, that we ask a lot more questions. Have you considered this? Have you thought about that? Have you looked at, how do you want to make patient payments more efficient, more modern? how do you remove patient receivables from your and speed up how your patients pay you using modern technology like text to pay as an example,
Mhm.
as opposed to, hey, look, here's just a loan and take that loan. Now you're in business and you figure out the rest, go elsewhere. And I think a lot of our doctors want to have a single point of advice, right? And what they're looking for, much like their practice management software packages and EHR systems, what they're looking for is a one-stop shop that handles everything in an integrated manner so
Mhm.
that they don't have to have 15 different vendors and paying 15 different bills. The same thing works in banking as well. If you align yourself with a banker that's asking those questions and looking out for your financial well-being in a holistic manner and managing that relationship holistically, you have that one individual as that advisor for a lifetime. And that individual can bring other experts to the table,
Yeah.
but that individual and their team of experts will be asking a lot more questions than someone who's just simply trying to sell a loan and move on.
So
Um,
are you talking about like practice management advice, practice management?
yeah, when it comes to it's financial management. The financial management within the practice is where the
Got
bank
it.
specializes. Yeah,
Okay. So it's banking plus that. I got you. Okay.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's about, okay, you have a patient, right? That patient is sitting at home, not feeling well. That patient wants to get on your schedule. Well, how do you do that? And then how
mhm.
do you determine, prior to the patient coming to your practice, how are you understanding whether or not that patient, how they're going to pay you for the services that day? How do you set the right expectations for that patient?
Mhm.
And once that patient arrives, have you already collected all the demographic information? Or are you going to collect it on a clipboard when
Mhm.
they arrive? And then when you render your services, is the patient going to be prepared for their copay deductibles, what have you? Are you going to let them walk out the door and collect on the back end after you get reimbursement for their portion of the payment stream? You can go on, you can see where that can go on,
Yeah. Yeah.
or your collections, how do you reconcile what the insurance company reimbursed you? How do you reconcile that? And do you write
Mhm.
off a lot of bad debt? Why would you do that? What other methodologies can you put in place? And that's where I
Right.
mentioned text to pay as an example, reduces your patient receivables if you lever it as a tool. And
And,
so those type of conversations.
right. And so from my knowledge, at least, offering financial management services as a bank, that's kind of rare amongst your competitors. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah, I
Okay.
think what makes us different in the marketplace, where, what we're interested in is a long-standing relationship. We're not
Mhm.
interested in, so if somebody wants to come talk to my team and they say, hey, look, here, I'm looking for some capital. I want to buy this equipment or whatever, and that's all they're looking for. That it does may not necessarily fit. What I'm looking for is someone who's willing to have a more robust conversation so that I can provide them the counsel that they might need to ensure that piece of equipment doesn't put them under.
Mhm.
And you've heard many of stories, and I've been around a long time, Carl, and I know you have as well. But there's many a story, where a lender has provided, because that's what they are, a lender. They provided too much money to someone, and they were in over their head. They couldn't make their payments. The business plan didn't make sense. They didn't realize the fact that they have to continue to pay for landscaping services,
Mhm.
example, in their pro forma, and as a result they sunk. And that's when we on the back end, when we're looking at, why did someone go out of business, what happened to them, what
Mhm.
could we have done differently to have helped them avoid the pitfalls. And we have all of those learnings over a course of
Yeah.
years, or tens of thousands of client interactions.
Right.
You get to learn the pitfalls, and that's what we try to bring to the table.
Right. So, what are some tips to choosing? The reason I asked that is because I was going to ask this next question kind of in two parts. The question is, what are some tips for choosing like the right banker, not a good banker, but the right banker? And I was going to ask you, when the financial management services aren't needed, maybe they're getting it through their account, somebody else, uh, and then when they are, because there are people who some need, both, and some need alone. So, let's take the one. I guess it's the more tips for choosing a right banker when it's a loan. and not necessarily a financial management service? What would you, it's hard. It's hard to, it's a big decision. You know, if you're a typical practice owner doesn't know much about it. So how do you choose something important when you're not sure how to do it in this case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sticking with just the loan as per your question.
Yeah.
So, what happens, right, is that in my mind, it's about, hey, look, I want to purchase. I'm a business owner. I put myself in that
Yeah.
practice. So I need capital to do something. Let's say it's to buy a piece of the real estate that I'm leasing today. I want to purchase that.
Okay.
And so I need a loan. The question on the table is, what's important to me in terms of that? Am I looking just simply for X number of dollars for X number of years? Have I gone through that calculation? I know how much I can afford. Is that what
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for? Or am I looking for what happens after the loan? Or, what I mean by that, Carl, would be, okay, I know I'm going to need the commercial real estate today. It's
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also going to need to do some project work to improve that real estate 5 years from now.
Okay.
So I'm looking for someone who can take care of the next 5 years worth of my lending needs.
Mm-hmm.
Or, hey, look, at some point in the future, I have an associate that's in my practice that might buy into my practice as well as own a piece of the action on the real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm making sure that whatever I put in place, that I can add an associate to it, or I can modify the loan. That's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, it comes down to listing the criteria that you're seeking in terms of the type of loan that you're looking for today, but much more importantly, what happens tomorrow, the day after, a few years from now? What are the next stages? Because there are certain situations, and Carl, I'm sure you've heard of this as well, where uh, one of our doctors will go out, they'll go out and shop for that loan. They haven't thought about tomorrow, and then what they end up finding is that they're at capacity. The organization they're working with doesn't have the capacity to do an add-on loan for future needs, or
Mm.
when the doctor bought the piece of equipment and financed the piece of equipment, they forgot about the soft costs of training. For example, it goes around the equipment. Now they have to come out of pocket for that, and that might have to come out of their short-term deposit dollars that they didn't expect to spend because it wasn't a thoughtful. So I would say that, to summarize all of that, if you will, is a list of criteria. What am I looking for today? What might my needs be over the next 5 to 7 years?
Yeah.
And so that you can anticipate then, what type of organization you want to work with, because can they answer those questions? Because now that'll result in questions, right? Which is, so help, Mr. or Mrs. Lender that I'm speaking with,
Yeah.
answer these questions for me. This is the criteria that's most important to me. It might be
Yeah.
payment, it might be term, it might be future borrowings, it might be, what if I add that associate, as I mentioned, or what about the soft costs, so on and so, and making sure that that provider for you can meet your needs today and tomorrow.
Yeah. And let me say it a little bit differently, and just you tell me if I've got it right, because the theme of every example you were giving was not plan it out, but I think of it as, you want to borrow money to do this with your business. Let's just take new equipment. You want to buy a new piece of equipment because you want to serve more patients on it. So play that. Let's imagine that goes the way you want and it's successful. What is it going to take for that to be successful? There's training, there's this, there's that, there's some lending limits. And then you can, if you've got some picture of that, you can go to a lender and say, this is what I need, and this is what I anticipate. Tell me how your loan options fit that.
Yes.
What are the caveats I need to know about? And then each side's coming with its own expertise. And so, the right banker should be able to answer those questions.
You're absolutely right.
Maybe give you a couple more, you didn't think about this too. So, you'd rather give a loan that's going to succeed, right? Rather than paint somebody in a corner.
You're right. You're right. Yep. And in addition to, yeah, you're right. In addition to, how do you continue to, like, for example, if you buy a piece of equipment that needs supplies that you need to buy. Can you get
Right.
those supplies? How much will those supplies ongoing cost you?
Hmm.
How are you going to pay for those supplies ongoing?
Hmm.
Much like vaccines. How are you going to pay for those vaccines up front in February to administer them to
Hmm.
school children that go to school in September, and you get
Hmm.
reimbursed for that in the fall after they've come to see you in August or September.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Yeah. You just kind of think it through, not in terms of not so much the loan, but the business opportunity that the
yeah.
loan will support. And they have to mesh nicely in order for it to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with how you
Yeah.
paraphrase that.
And if a banker is looking kind of confused or I don't know, whatever, and yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, or if
Because
they
they're
say,
not,
or if they say, "Hey, look, don't worry about that. That's
oh
not a
yeah, don't
big."
worry about that. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Well, I don't think so. Yeah.
yeah. We'll take care of you at some point in the future. Oh, you real? How will you? That matters.
Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, now I understand. Now I understand. Which kind of plays into, if we come back to the financial management services you guys offer, that's the same thing, right? It's sort of, it's more than just thinking ahead, but it's a lot of planning. Like the common theme of both of them is let's just think about the planning side of this for a few minutes and wrap our head around it. So let's see if a loan makes sense, how much, what terms, what type. Is that right?
You're right. You're right. Yeah, there's a lot of planning that does go into it, and I think in some cases, some folks don't think through, all the caveats or other scenarios because they don't, that might be that doctor's first time loan, or that might be that doctor's fifth loan, but over those five occurrences, they've learned something. But at the end of the day, when like in our case where we've done tens of thousands, it's a lot simpler to have that conversation because we've seen it all,
Right.
from really good situations to bad situations, and we've been
Right.
able to ask the right questions to help the doctor head off a bad situation, and that matters.
Yeah.
You know,
And you give me a chance to say, I get to say this every once in a while to listeners, please choose healthcare specialists in whatever it is you're looking for. So in Nick's case, healthcare banking, you can find somebody who's got, 1,000 years of experience in general business banking. It's different. That doesn't mean they've seen everything that, healthcare bankers like Nick and his team have seen. Um, that kind of detail just, it matters. It's valuable. Pick whatever industry you're in, but in this case for healthcare, pick specialists whose clients are similar, whose experience is similar. The insights are just going to be better. Um,
people who are committed,
Committed to it.
right?
Yes.
And they want to
Yeah.
see you survive in the community that you operate in.
Yeah.
I think that matters. The worst thing that can ever happen is have a practice close, and what happens to the patients? What happens to the employees that were employed? What happens to the community when healthcare is no longer available, especially in some of these rural communities that have
Yeah.
been where the large systems have left? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, but sometimes people get in over their heads, and so it's important that you have the right advisors. I agree at the table.
Yeah. Like you said earlier, you said it almost in passing, should I collect the copay now or later? Well,
Mhm.
a business only practices in healthcare deal with that question, right? I mean, maybe there's a couple of others, but the general retail business does not. And so if your banker's experiences or your advisor's experience, they can't answer that question. They can guess. They can't answer that question with any experience. That's a big, really important question to
Yeah,
anybody who practices, you know,
it is.
you know,
And what's fascinating too is like in our case, Carl, we actually manage the team. It's a group practice, and so
mhm,
what we mean by that, and I'll give you another example of why a specialist matters, is so we have a large practice that's in Columbus, Ohio. That practice was thinking of a brand new practice management and system
mm,
for their practice. And they're saying, hey, look, with the type of practice that we have, we know that there's going to be some disruption with our providers in terms that they have to learn the new system, what template should they use, what impact, what type of training, and do you have any other practices that look like mine that we're considering software as a service,
yeah,
and can you introduce us? And so in our case, because we specialize, we said absolutely.
yeah,
We reached out to one of our doctor practices up in the Philadelphia market. We got, because they don't compete, they don't know each other.
Hmm.
We brought them together on a call, just like you and I are having today. We allow them then to share points of view around connectivity, cloud versus server, the templates that were needed for their type of specialty, what it meant to physician productivity, so on and so forth. And then all a couple of the ancillary things, like a T1 line that was needed for the one practice that the other one thought they can skirt, et cetera.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, for us, that's a service because we take care of our clients and we're able to bring them together to share
Yeah.
thoughts. Yes, someone who doesn't specialize in healthcare
Can't do
wouldn't.
it.
Yeah, they wouldn't know who they have and what they have. They
Yeah.
wouldn't
They can't
know
do
what
it.
their practice
Yeah.
management package is. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. That's awesome. I say this to many guests. We could continue to, I love talking about planning. I really do. But in the interest of more, kind of bite-sized advice here on practice care, a couple of wrap-up questions for you. First, is there anything you think I should have asked you, but I just didn't think to ask you about what we've been talking about?
I think one of the other things, Carl, that we didn't mention
Hmm.
is that there's a lot of folks that in businesses that encircle the business of healthcare.
Okay.
And you have design build firms, you have equipment suppliers, you have CPA firms, you
Hmm.
have practice brokerage organizations, so on and so forth. I mean, one of the things that a doctor would have to be concerned with, in my opinion, is making sure that you're clear about those relationships that exist between those parties.
Mm.
Some cases, some individuals might say, "Hey, look, thank you for coming to me. I'm glad you partake of my services. But if you need quote unquote financing, or here's where you go for financing.
Hmm.
This is my guy or gal for
Right.
financing."
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a business arrangement between those two parties in the background.
Hmm.
And so you, as a doctor, should be very clear about, so what's the relationship there? Why are they referring you to quote unquote their person?
Hmm.
Is there money being exchanged there? Are you paying for their services and have the other party also paying for their services? And
Hmm.
that person, you being clear about that matters, because that might say to you, "Oh, yeah, I should probably expand the scope of how I
Yeah.
shop so
Yeah.
that I'm getting a fair interaction that's outside of controlled business arrangements like that." And I think that's important because that shows up in healthcare. And I don't know how many people see that.
Yeah. It's a good point. Good point. And the other wrap-up question that I ask is, so let's imagine we've caught a listener's attention. They've been, thinking about a loan. They've been, wondering about it. Maybe they're even in the midst of it. But really, for whatever reason, they're stuck. They're enthusiastic about doing it, but they're stuck at the starting line. Maybe it's in the back of mind. There's these questions about planning in the future, and now we've helped them articulate. I don't exactly know, but they're stuck. Are there a couple of like super simple things they could do to get off the starting line and kind of get moving down the path towards making a good choice about, a lender or a loan?
Yeah, I think it starts with having conversations with the right advisors, Carl. That's my point of view. I think of, I think of, when you ask that question, I think of one doctor specifically that
Yeah.
pops that I just recently. So he was referred to us by one of our other trusted advisors that we've come to know over the course of years. That doctor works for another party. That
Hmm.
doctor says, "Hey, look, I want to be in business for myself, and here's what I envision." And so the fact is that when he was thinking about that, he was quote unquote, he was stuck. He didn't know, is this really what I want to do? I'm not sure if this is what I want to do. And I know that in hindsight because ultimately he reached out. But what happened is that he was speaking to his CPA firm who specializes in healthcare. The CPA firm said, "Hey, look, if you want to whiteboard this, blue sky it, you want to consider the possibilities, reach out to Nick. Nick will talk with you." And so I did. I entertained the conversation and we
Hmm.
got to talking. It took him about 11 months until he pulled the trigger and decided to move ahead.
Hmm.
But a lot of that is because he wanted to make sure that he did the right research, asked the right
Good for
questions,
him.
all
Yeah.
the possibilities. And so for him to get off the dime, started with have a conversation. Don't be bashful. Don't
Hmm.
be don't be embarrassed to ask questions, to ask for advice. Do your homework, and but don't count on yourself or your family members, if you will, for that advice. Seek disinterested third party insights. You
Yeah.
may never see those individuals again, and that's okay. Or like when people come to us, we'll provide all the advice and transparency we can. Some of the times they don't want to continue with us, they go elsewhere, but that's great because now we know we help someone
Yeah.
establish great business. But it starts with doing your homework and being a great researcher, much like most of our doctors have to do when they're pursuing their degree too, right? Is they got to do their homework and understand how the systems, the processes, their points of consideration, so that they can have a well-informed decision to make. And I think having that well-informed data set or set of observations, or you can bank on those individuals that you spoke with, and you can stand on their shoulders to reach the heights that you want to reach. I
Yeah.
think that's where I would start if the person
Yeah.
start
I
talking.
start talking. It's such a good advice. Start talking to people. Make sure they've got, some special experience in healthcare. And I think your last question, if you're starting out like the scenario you painted, your last question for everyone should be is, who else do you think I should be talking to? And do you know anybody you could introduce? And just, it doesn't matter where you start. Start anywhere. There's no
Right.
the only wrong move is not talking. Just start
Right.
talking to people and then get somebody else. And eventually the picture starts to form,
It does.
you
And,
know?
and they have to challenge their own, sometimes too, Carl, they have to challenge their own thinking. Sometimes, folks will get stuck on, even something simple, they'll get stuck on, hey, look, I'm self-selecting. I don't believe I'm credit worthy, or I'm self-selecting.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to do this because of blank. And you just got to think about it objectively. It's just like you have to think about your business and going into business, and objectively it is a business, and it's much like our doctors treat their patients, right? Is that they can't be afraid to tell the patient what they see. They can't
Hmm.
be afraid to recommend a procedure to a patient, or a diagnostic to a patient. They're being fact-based,
Yeah.
and that's what they're doing. Is they need to accumulate the fact base from which to have a thoughtful choice.
Right. Perfect. It's such good advice. And yeah, and so it's a great place for us to finish right here. A lot of good information. Nick, thank you for taking some time again to come on Practice Care. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything that you do, Carl, in helping private practices remain private and independent, and succeed in the marketplace today. It matters because you're doing the same thing we just talked about, right? You're informing, providing business insights to help your listeners to achieve greater financial outcomes and business outcomes for their patients. So
Yeah.
thank you for what you
Thank
do.
you. That was for that very nice, unplanned uh compliment. I really appreciate it. Um, so uh Nick supplied contact information. And so if anybody wants to reach out, all the contact information will be in the show notes for this episode. So that's another way to get a hold of Nick. And a couple of points before we finish up. First, if you're someone like Nick or I and you serve private practice owners and you've got some expertise you want to share, or if you're a private practice owner yourself, we've had plenty on, and you've got some experience on the business side of private practice you think your peers and colleagues would benefit from, either way, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Nick's episode, every episode, there's a link, a couple of clicks. Tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, we do a new episode every week. And the easiest and best way to stay up to date is to subscribe to Practice Care. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, YouTube, all the major players. Subscribe, and that way, as new episodes publish and go live, you could be notified. Thanks very much, and until next time.